So let's recall what we know about parallelograms. Parallelograms are quadrilateral with both pairs of opposite sides parallel to each other. Oops, just one. And we know that parallelograms, the parallel sides, are congruent to each other, and the opposite angles are also congruent. We also know that the diagonals of parallelograms bisect each other into congruent segments. Why are we reviewing what we already know about parallelograms? Because there are special types of parallelograms. We have a rhombus, which is a parallelogram with four congruent sides. We have a rectangle, which is a parallelogram with four right angles. And we have a square, which is a parallelogram that is both a rectangle and a rhombus at the same time. So each one of these, they go together and then they give us interesting little tidbits. For example, we know that a rhombus has four congruent sides. Well, we also know that a parallelogram is a rhombus if and only if its diagonals are perpendicular. So here we have a parallelogram, right? And we have our green diagonals here, and we can see right here in the middle a little box that indicates that those are perpendicular to each other, which would mean that this is a rhombus. Conversely, we also know that if it's a rhombus, the diagonals are going to meet at a perpendicular. Here we have diagonals, and what we know is that a parallelogram is a rhombus if and only if each diagonal bisects the opposite angles. So here we're creating four congruent angles because the diagonals bisect the opposite angles. Once again, if this happens, it's a rhombus. If it's a rhombus, then this will happen. So is a rhombus. The last special kind of qualities we're going to find out. We're going to see here we have a parallelogram. We have our diagonals drawn. But here we know that a parallelogram is a rectangle if and only if the diagonals are congruent. So if this is true, that all four of these segments are congruent, which makes the entire diagonals congruent, right? Then this is a rectangle. And if we have a rectangle, the diagonals are going to be congruent. But what if we have a parallelogram, and let me get my parallelogram drawn. This is parallel, and this is parallel to this. And let's put in our diagonals, because we were just talking about diagonals, although that one's not very good. There we go. So what if this is true? Well, the diagonals are congruent, so that means it's a rectangle. But then we also have this little guy right here, so the diagonals are perpendicular. That equals a rhombus. So what do we have going on here? Well, if we come back up, when we talked about a square, we said that a square was both a rectangle and a rhombus. So if both are true, our parallelogram we have here is a square.